I'm gonna show how I made the pesto that we had for lunch, which was a nettle pesto with sunflower seeds and olive oil and a little bit of Parmesan. And we're gonna start, I picked the nettles last night. So these are stinging nettles, and they just have come up. The plants are about this tall right now, you know, some smaller. You wanna pick them before they bloom, because once they bloom, they start to toughen up. And so they're called stinging nettles because they have these stinging hairs all along the stem and all along the bottom of the leaves. The hairs all face, they face toward the front of the leaves. So if you're careful, you can handle them and not get stung. But when I picked these, I wore gloves. But you can see that, so the hairs run toward the tip. And so like if you're gonna handle them, you wanna handle them towards the tip and not back, because those little stinging hairs will break off under your skin, and they've got formic acid in them, along with a number of other fun compounds, and they're not damaging to you, but they hurt, and first they'll sting, and then they'll tingle, and then they'll itch. They're not poisonous. It's just a physical action where they inject these irritating chemicals under your skin, and so if you cook them or crush them, you can eat the nettles and you won't get any stinging, and there's nothing harmful in those stinging hairs if it's not being injected under your skin. In fact, some of those compounds are probably pretty good for you. So in order to make the pesto, some people make pesto with raw nettles, and that works because when you grind up your pesto, it's going to crush all those stinging hairs. But I like my pesto to not oxidize, and so before I crush them up, I'm going to blanch them in boiling water. And this also gives you a pot of basically strong nettle tea. So you can let that cool off, and you can use it as broth. You can drink it. I've even carbonated it. It tastes kind of like beer when you carbonate it. So it only takes about a minute for the nettles to wilt. Let's see, I'm gonna go grab my tongs so I can put them under there. And this is a gallon of nettles. I'm not gonna measure anything else, so it just, you know, it's making pesto. You kind of do about what seems like how much you want. And then you add a little more olive oil to make it all blend up well. So basically the goal of the blanching here is to wilt the nettles so that those stinging hairs are all squashed down. Cook them enough that they won't oxidize when I start squishing them. And so it takes about a minute. So nettles are extremely rich in a lot of minerals. They're a good source of iron. They're, for a plant, they're actually pretty high in protein. They're high in vitamin A, and they just make you feel good. Like eating nettles in the spring just makes you feel like, you know, maybe the winter has passed more, and you've eaten all the goodness that's coming up from the ground in the spring as spring starts. Thank you. You can just set it right down. Or, sorry about that, let me not trip you here. I'm just gonna wrap these up in this cloth, and I'm gonna dunk it in cold water just to cool it off so that I don't burn my hands. So this is just to chill the nettles down a little bit. And then I'm gonna squeeze. And you can do this back in your pot of nettle broth if you want. So you're just trying to get as much moisture. A lot of that moisture is just the blanching water. Some of that moisture, as you can see with the green, is actually the nettle juice. You could use this water for dyeing wool. I think it'd give you kind of a greenish yellow, although if you change the pH, apparently you get some red out of it. So like if you add ammonia or aged urine, you might be able to get, you wouldn't want to drink it at that point, you might be able to get some red colors. And what's neat, so we took a whole gallon of nettles there, and you'll see in a minute, that's going to squeeze down to maybe about a cup. Bright green. And at this stage, the nettles are pretty tender, so you could pick out all these stems, but they're going to blend up, and you won't notice that there's all that stem in there. Okay, so we've got nettle. And we're going to add some Parmesan cheese. You don't have to add cheese if you want to make it without dairy. I would recommend just adding a little more nuts, or in this case we're going to use sunflower seeds. and a little more olive oil. So if you don't want to have dairy in your pesto, that's fine. It's pretty easy to switch it out. We're going to add some garlic, at least 3 cloves. Depends how much you like your garlic. And of course, if you don't like garlic, you wouldn't have to add it, but I can't imagine that you wouldn't like garlic. So, yeah.
Do you have a preference for a mortar and pestle versus a food processor for getting all the flavor?
I like a food processor because it's super easy, and it blends up all the bits of the stems really smoothly. I know that traditionally pesto is made in a mortar and pestle. When I use a mortar and pestle, I just tend to slop things around the counter. So my preference, I actually use a blender at home, but I brought the food processor today and I made my first batch of pesto in food processor and I liked it a lot. So I think that might be my tool of choice from now on out. You make bigger batches too. Food processor, by the way, came from the Take It or Leave It on Lopez. It's an excellent source of food processors, but I've gotten, I think, more that didn't work than did. So before I add that olive oil, I'm going to add some sunflower seeds. I like these because they're affordable. They give you a nice nutty flavor. And they're a native plant, not here, but to the Americas. And I think they're an underutilized sort of nut. They have a delicious flavor. You can make absolutely amazing sunflower seed sorbet. That's kind of like ice cream. So that's not going to be enough olive oil, but I want to start blending it. And then I'll put some more in until it gives me a good texture. Let's see if I can drown out the helicopter there. So basically I'm just trying to blend it until the sunflower seeds aren't obvious chunks, and until it's nice and smooth, and add enough olive oil to make it nice and smooth. And then you can freeze it. You can stick it in the fridge. It keeps for a while pretty well. Oops. Take a look. I'll show you what this looks like. And you could add more or less of just about anything if you wanted it smoother or thicker.
So what are some of the uses? What could I add that to in my recipes?
Ooh, so I mean, obviously it's really good on pasta. Just add it and then add a little bit of pasta cooking water, or we discovered today it's even better if you add a little bit of clam nectar. We also mix it into eggs when we make scrambled eggs. I made some salad dressing the other night where I just tossed it into a vinaigrette and it gave me all the garlic and other deliciousness. You can make like little pastries where you smear it on the way people would smear on pesto, or roll it into like a brioche. It doesn't taste like basil pesto because it doesn't have that aromatic basil nature. It basically tastes like nettles and garlic. But that means sometimes it actually blends in better.
Well, that was delicious on the clams and linguine.
Yeah, so it's really good with clams linguine. You could probably put it into clams on the half shell. This is nettle season. They're out there. You harvest them as long as you check and make sure that you're not harvesting ones that have caterpillars on them. You're not doing much harm. They're incredibly abundant. They're very productive. And when you take the tops off the nettles, they send up 2 more shoots. So unless you're picking in someone's patch where they want to be making cordage and they want nice, long, straight nettles, you're not doing any harm to the nettles. And so you can feed yourself and feed your friends and feed your family without very much environmental impact at all, and you get the richness of the nettles. Some people find that nettles, so that along with the formic acid in the hairs, there's also some histamines, and some people find that nettles actually help with allergies because of those histamines, which is interesting. I know that they just, for me, eating nettles just makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I've eaten something that nourishes all of me. And picking nettles makes me feel good. So you get it all ways. This freezes really well, and I freeze with, if I were to just do this and not add anything but nettles and some of the water, I'd make like a nettle puree and freeze it in little mini muffin tins, and then put those in a bag in the freezer. And then if it's not nettle season and I'm making some soup or some pasta sauce, I can just throw in one of those little nettle pucks and make everything taste richer. Nettle pizza is amazing. You put like caramelized onions and maybe some mozzarella and nettles and pancetta or something other nice rich meat on top of either a flatbread, or we've made it with a chickpea pancake with.
And I'm seeing clam fritters.
Clam fritters, ooh, yeah, you could definitely dress your clam fritters with nettle pesto. Then you've got the nettle tea, so you can make soup with that. You can just drink it. You can carbonate it. You could probably freeze it and use it as broth. You can. I think it's best eaten, but you can use it as a hair tonic too.
Have you ever tried it as a topical thing? What it does is it, like if you got stressed muscle or something, strained muscle on the neck, I usually get when I'm pulling on a canoe a long time, your shoulders.
This is the whole plant.
Oh yeah, and these ones have got roots on them.
Yeah.
So, and Kevin's got the proper equipment for picking nettles there. You want gloves, although I find that I get stung on the back of my fingers.
And I'm a gourmet nettle person, so I only pick the very top little bud there. I think Madrona goes down a few leaves.
I go down about here. I didn't used to.
I just do the very tip.
I didn't used to, but then I started making things like pesto, where I'm blending them anyway.
Yeah, you need a lot.
And where that stem just kind of disappears. But yeah, because I learned nettle picking from Kevin. Kevin's my dad, and so I always pick that really delicate, and it makes just exquisite dishes that way. But you can get away with picking more if you're going to blend it up.
So just in this area here, mainly right here.
Okay.
A little more.
They're kind of
A
wilty.
little more
So.
aggressive.
All right.
Let me do it.
Okay.
You want Rose to do it?
Oh, I survived. So
And I'm not going to put that one back in the eating bag.
it's multi-purpose. Go ahead.
I will show folks how to eat raw nettles if you want. So I was telling you the way that the hairs always go toward the tip. And so that means that you can handle them if you're careful. I don't think I've gotten stung while I was trying to show this to you. So I want to show you how you can eat the tip here. So I'm going to take the tip off, and then I'm going to squash those hairs, squashing them always toward the tip so I'm not going to hurt myself while I do this. And just going to give them a really good squashing so that all those hairs get squashed down and they can't sting. And I kind of roll it up. I'm just trying to squash it so that everything is all disarmed, and then you can eat that. Now, my recommendation when you do put it in your mouth is because just in case you missed one, I always would stick it in my mouth and stick it onto my molar because you don't want to get stung in the back of your throat. Raw nettle tastes really different than cooked nettle. It's greener, kind of maybe a fresher flavor. So you can eat the bigger leaves that way too. You got to roll them up, but they're not as tender. So if you're going to eat them raw, typically you just want to go for that tip. One of the neat things about nettles is they've got these stinging hairs, and so they don't have to protect themselves with anything else. So like compared to spinach, which is full of oxalic acid, nettles are really much more, they're more nutritious because they're not full of anti-feedants to keep you from eating them because they can sting you instead. And they're also really tender. They're not particularly fibrous for the same reason. So, and nettle tea, there's a pleasure to drinking nettle tea. So certainly I wouldn't discourage folks, but if your goal is to nourish yourself with nettles, you'll get more out of it, not just from eating the whole nettle, but making sure you eat it with some kind of fat. So like the olive oil and the cheese both, and actually the sunflower seeds, because that will make a lot of those vitamins more available to you. So if your goal is sort of maximizing nutrition, cook your nettles. That's also going to make the nutrients more available. Cook them, eat them with some fat. If your goal is just the delight of nettle flavor, the tea is going to be great.
The traditional word around here for stinging nettle is tsach tsach. It's T-S-E-X, T-S-E-X, tsach tsach. And it means sting, sting. Tsach means sting. So I think that's kind of interesting because it's one of the few times that the English name and the traditional name are the same thing. They both just mean stinging. It's a pretty powerful plant. I think about like its kind of nutrient load as being just perfectly timed at the beginning of spring. And I think about people coming out of winter, not having a whole lot of fresh foods, eating like a lot of smoked and cured and preserved foods. And then coming out of winter, one of the very first plants that pops up are these stinging nettles, which are just like this energizing plant. They just give you this burst of phytonutrients, and timing our life cycle with the cycle of the seasons, as our ancestors did, that nettle would be like the dream multivitamin coming out of a long winter, and it would get you all geared up for the work season.
The other thing is that nettles fit into the ecology of the landscape here in an interesting way, because in order to produce all that nutrients, they need nutrients themselves. So nettles are associated with rich soils. They won't grow just anywhere. So like if you have nettles popping up in your garden, you should know that you've done a good job and you've built really beautiful soil for those nettles. They're associated often with the deciduous woodlands, which are less common here in the islands. And so like you'll see nettles and alders together, or nettles and willows. When you're harvesting nettles, one thing to look out for is if that tip, the part that I took off there, is curled up and it looks like someone has stuck it together. That's probably because a caterpillar is making its home there and has actually cemented it together. The other thing to look for is what's called frass, which is caterpillar poop. And there'll be little green droppings on the leaves. And if you see that, you want to leave that patch for those butterflies. The stems have these long fibers, and when they're, nettles in the woods can get really tall, and at the end of the season those fibers are strong, and it's been an important fiber in making cords to stitch things together and tie things together. Very, very flexible, huh? Yeah. I know people will spin it, so it's flexible and it can get really soft.
For
nets and strings. So yeah, nettles have been very important fiber, but I think they're so productive that people manage to eat them and make medicine from them and still have plenty to make cordage and make their blankets, etc. with them. Nettles are very, very generous plants, and we're just really lucky